My name is Jeff. I'm from Unconvention. I'm a bit of an imposter. I'm technically inept. I can't see what you're seeing, so that's going to sort of put me for a little bit. I'll struggle with my grade. But what I'm here to talk about today is, I think W used the phrase social technology. So there is a bit of teching about what I'm talking about, but really it's more of maybe it's a different way of thinking about things. Have you got a logo on the screen there?
Yeah, I need to duplicate.
We might just, I told you, I wasn't. I'll carry on anyway. What we set out to do, and it's very much inspired by Brazil, is have a mechanism for independent and grassroots DIY musicians and artists to be able to go and play anywhere in the country to a guaranteed audience, to a sold-out audience in a place they've never visited before and get paid for doing it. If anyone here has ever been in a band, that's quite an ambitious thing. Is anyone in a band? Has anyone ever tried to move a band around this country? It's very hard work. Shall I wait for one sec? Do you want me to put it in dubbers? Sorry, you can hear this.
Yeah.
We're just chatting away, it's fine.
It's busy doing something, but not what we want.
I can do it without. I'll carry on it out. So, we've got this idea called OffAxis. What I would have shown you, if I could get the slide up, is a photograph from last week, which is a picture of a venue in Chester, full of people. And that audience was there, had just been played to by a band from Hastings, 270 miles away. They'd played to a room full of people who they blew away by all accounts. I was there, it was a brilliant gig. And it didn't just happen by chance. And as I say, they got paid for doing so. A few weeks before that, we did an OffAxis show in Derby, where a band from Stockton-on-Tees, if you know, the northeast of England, did a very similar thing. I'll start with the why and then the how that works. I founded an organization called Unconvention, or co-founded an organization called Unconvention. Originally, I run record labels, and I still do. And we work with bands in Manchester, where I'm from. And we can do fairly well with those bands. Some of the bands we have at the minute can play to 200, 300 people in Manchester. And yet I cannot get them a gig 35 miles away in Leeds. Yep. And we started doing these events called Unconvention, which we started in 2008, which were very much about how technology is really changing the industry. Now, if anyone can remember back to 2008, it was doom and gloom. It was the slide that said the music industry is dead. And we had a conference in Salford with the likes of Dubber came along and SoundCloud and Music Glue, full of people who are actually very optimistic about the future of music. It wasn't this kind of, oh, the internet's going to ruin everything. It was, look at all this new opportunity. So we started doing these conferences that hopefully sets aside from the doom and gloom. But despite the fact we were doing these conferences where we were all talking about the new opportunity of the internet and how, you know, we could produce music cheaper, distribute it better, we could talk to people, we could have direct-to-fan relationships, the one thing that kept coming up, we did these things in Edinburgh, we went to Belfast, we went to Macclesfield, we went to eventually Brisbane and other places like that, and Groningen was another one, is that that's all well and good, but when it comes to bands playing live and gigging, they cannot move around. They cannot move around very easily. So I remember a particular incident sort of spurred us on to start thinking about what we're doing now, is we went to the Groningen in the Netherlands, and we went to watch a handful of phenomenal bands, as good as I've ever seen. And we got chatting to them, and we were talking about how great they all were. And then, of course, when I got back to Manchester 2 days later, I had a whole bunch of emails from these bands saying, Jeff, great to meet you, wasn't it fantastic? We'd love to come and play in Manchester. Now, this was the problem. This was the perfect example of the problem. I live in Manchester. I've been involved in the music for years and years there. I know all the promoters, I know all the venues. Everyone thinks we're all great and we all love each other. I couldn't get them a gig. And I can't get them a gig because they're from too far away and nobody's heard of them. And therefore, they're not going to sell a ticket. And as much as we're all a great, wonderful community in Manchester, people have to be able to sell tickets to get everyone paid. So we came up with a very simple concept. That this isn't a revolution by any means. We gig swapped. What we said to these bands in the Netherlands is, look, I know how great you are. I'd love to be able to put you on, speak to a venue, speak to a promoter, but it's not going to work. What we need to do is we need to find bands that are like you here in Manchester that have got audiences, and we'll put you together, and you come over and play in front of their audience. They'll look after you, they'll host you, and vice versa. So we started doing these gig swaps very successfully. The first band that came over, I remember, was a band called Astrid from Utrecht, I think, or somewhere like that. Played in Manchester at another band's EP launch, several hundred people there. They blew everyone away. It's a band that no one would have seen otherwise. They sold every CD that they brought with them. It was a success. So we started doing this gig swapping. But essentially, the gig swapping relied on who knew me and who else I knew. It was a very small network. As Dubba mentioned, 2009, we then got to hear about this thing called the Fora Eixo, which is a Brazilian network. I don't have time to tell you about the wonderful facets of the Fora Eixo, and Dubba's making a film about it, so watch that when it comes out. But what was interesting about the network is they very much set at the heart of what they were doing, moving bands around. And again, if I could show you the slide, I'd show you Brazil, and it all started in this town called Cubana, if I pronounced that correctly, which is away from Sao Paulo and Rio. So if you imagine Brazil's this big, Sao Paulo and Rio here, it's over here. And this to them was the axis, and they were away from that, so we called this thing OffAxis. Or they called themselves, Fora Eixo, which we translated as OffAxis. But what was really interesting, and you saw a little bit on the film, is they started their own currency, a let scheme, which is, if you know what a let scheme is, or like the Bristol pound, where musicians were trading things. It's a step away from barter. Jeremy mentioned barter before. It's where you barter's one thing, but if you can create a trading system above it, you can exchange things and you can hold value in different places. I'm an economist, sorry, I hope that makes sense. But the phrase that I think sums it up, and this is I got from Felipe, I think, who you saw in the film, is what they'd managed to do is put a value on camaraderie. Okay, so in the music industry, and certainly the level we work out up in Manchester with our DIY and independent labels, people help each other out. Bands put bands on, this gig swapping happens, but there's no tangible value on it. There's a sense of, well, you helped us, we should help you, you're friends with that guy, so we'll put you, blah, blah, blah. But it's very difficult, and therefore not necessarily that efficient. And what they'd done with the Fora Eixo is they'd put tangible values on things. They said that thing is worth 10, and that was worth 20, so you have to do that twice to get that. That's the system they built. So that kind of got us thinking again. What I got thinking too about this touring idea, this gig swapping thing is, well, actually we've got something of phenomenal value here. Because when bands are doing these gig swaps, the band who's hosting it, the audience they have in front of them is of immense value to a band that couldn't find that audience otherwise, i.e. bands from different towns. Enormous value. And I think now, what is it, 8 o'clock on a Friday night? In this country, there are rooms full of hundreds of people who love music. And there's a little bit of space between the thing that they came to see and the thing that, and where they are now. And we always had this thinking about, when we think about live music, is the hardest thing for a band to do is book an empty room and then try and fill it with people. If you're smart, you find a room full of people who love music and you go and play in that room. So that was the sense of what we were working on. Because I haven't got my slide, I'll just refer to my notes. What we were looking at is making a more formal network of this gig swapping. We visited the Fora Eixo in 2012, and we started to put together this idea of how can we put a value on these audiences. We got a little bit of money off the Technology Strategy Board, a little bit of money off the PRS Foundation, and some off Joining the Dots to eventually develop a website that was going to sit at the center of all this. So how that works, again, I'll do it with that slide, it's all right. This is a network called OffAxis. A band joins the OffAxis network. They're invited to join. It's not an open system. This isn't MySpace or Facebook. You can't just say, well, I like the idea of this, I'm going to join it. There's a reason for that. You get invited to join. The way we invite bands is we phone promoters we know around the country or wherever it might be, or journalists we know around the country, or even other bands around the country. We explain the idea, which I haven't explained yet, and then we said, give me the 5 bands that will get this idea, because it has to be the right bands. Those bands join the network. When they join the network, they're required to put on a gig. The gig is a gig that they host in front of their fans in their hometown. They then use the OffAxis system to identify another band that's similar, that they can see that their audience would enjoy, and they put that band in front of their audience. They gig swap, or they host them. The visiting band, here we are, I mean, again, if I had the picture, I'd show you. The visiting band, like we had 2 weeks ago in Chester, is now playing on a stage like this with 200 people who've never heard of them before in a place they've never visited before, and they've got their set to blow them away. That's their job. After that, it's up to them. But if we can get them in that room, it gives them the opportunity to build a national fan base. Now, this is how the system works. Once that show is complete, the band who hosted that band, so let's say it's a Chester band and they've hosted this band from Hastings, earn a credit. The bands who were hosted, who travelled up, are deducted a credit. So essentially, we've got a system of checks and balances. Yep. For every gig you put on, you earn. For every gig you want, you have to spend. And the thing is, that doesn't mean it has to be a swap. The band in credit at the minute in Chester, a band called the Maydays, can go to Swansea, Wrexham, Wigan, anywhere else where there's bands in the systems, as long as they can match on what they're doing. So the advantage of that is, well, first of all, the incentive is for bands to host more bands in their hometown, to put other bands in front of their audiences. And of course, every time they do that, it's redeemed exactly the same. The advantage of that above a gig swap, let's say, is it means there's a tangible value. It can't get lost. If you ever gig swapped, what usually happens is you put a band on, you work really hard, you get a great crowd, they come and play, 2 weeks later they split up. And all of that effort is gone. With this system, it's not. You've still got your one gig, you own it, as the system gets bigger. The second thing is it significantly expands the ability for that network to be bigger than just people I know. And me going, well, you'd be good with that band and you'd be good with that band, because we can invite people in. Okay, the key points to know. Did anything ever appear on the screen, or? I'll carry on. Right, we're doing all right with that. It opens up every single town in the country. Now, I run a record label. I've run bands around this country for 5, 6, 7 years. You go to 10 places. You go to Bristol, you go to London, you go to Brighton, you go to Manchester, you go to Liverpool, you go to Glasgow, you go to Edinburgh. You may go to the northeast. Here, 70 people in Exeter is worth the same as 70 people in Camden. Yep. So if you're a band from Barnsley and you can host and get 70 people in a room, that's worth just as much as anywhere else. So what's exciting about when we started OffAxis is the gigs have been in what you might call, and it's a bit patronizing, in peripheral towns or these sort of places, but that's where they're happening. There's people there who love music that aren't being serviced. And the reason they're not being serviced is there might be good bands there, but not enough to create, necessarily critical mass. They can bring these bands in. It's a viable mechanism for creating a national fan base. And then the spin-off of this is when we get it all up and running, is we can build a sort of kite mark. OffAxis becomes a brand that's public-facing. So the audience members will see a poster that says it's an OffAxis gig, and what they know that means is it's not only a brilliant gig who's good enough to be part of OffAxis from their hometown playing, but it's someone from somewhere else who's been matched, who will be as good as that band, who will be something that they will enjoy playing as well. We've got opportunities to expand overseas with it. We've got opportunities to use these credits with festivals, with all sorts of other things. And I probably don't, without the slides, I can't really say too much more. Where we're at the minute is we've got great bands. We actually launched the site, beta launch, if you'd like, that's the word, next week. But it's already working. It already circulates. It's as simple as that. It's this idea of, we've got networks, direct to fan, direct to fan, direct to fan. But what if we have artist to artist, artist to artist, artist to artist? And that's kind of it. I would give you, my email address is Jeff, Jeff, @unconventionhub.org. You would have it on the screen. If you follow us, it's called OffAxis. And if anyone has any ideas about what more we could do with it, or if they know bands that would get 70 people in their town, whether it's death metal, it doesn't matter, or folk we can always match, then do let me know. And otherwise, thanks very much.
Thank you, Jeff.